Greetings. Thanks for coming on in. My name is Allison Jones Turner, and I'm with Source Booksellers here in Detroit, Michigan. And we are delighted to celebrate this book today. I hope that everyone that's joining us knows that if they need closed caption, you can use the CC part at the bottom, and it will appear for you. The captions will appear, and the chat is open. Make sure that you chat with a lot of kind words and cheer this book on. I think everybody's kind of coming in here. I want to start out first with, if you're not familiar, in the back here, I have on my Source Booksellers shirt, and I also have a sign that says Source Booksellers, books by and about women. And so we love to celebrate this category in the store. And this book is really full of that. Why Willie Mae Thornton Matters comes out September 12th, and it also is going to be paired with another book. So let me tell you a little bit about the Music Matters series at University of Texas Press. It is a new series of concise books that make outside arguments about the meaning and legacy of a wide range of popular artists. Some include Why Sinead O'Connor Matters, that came out together with Why Tammy Wynette Matters in May 2023. And today, we're celebrating a book this book that's coming out will be released together on September 12th with Why Mariah Carey Matters. This book is a queer Black biography in essays about the performer who gave us Hound Dog, Ball and Chain, and other songs that changed the course of American music. We are really excited for its release, and today we have the author Lene Dennis with us, who is an artist, a writer, a DJ. She was a Sterling Brown 2022 Distinguished Visiting Professor of Africana Studies of Williams College, and she's currently a doctoral student on the Department of Visual Culture at Goldsmiths University in London. And she's joining us today from way across the pond in Europe. We are delighted to have her in conversation today with Dream Hampton, an award-winning filmmaker and writer from Detroit. You may know about the Frameline documentary Treasure in 2015. The HBO documentary It's a Hard Truth, Ain't It, in 2019, which also came with the Emmy-nominated Surviving R. Kelly in 2019. And that impact of that film still reverberates today. Hampton was also the recipient of the Myth Foundation Gloria Award and was the 2019 on the list of the Time 100 most influential people in the world. And she received the 2020 Peabody Award for the best documentary. So we basically have a fantastic conversation here about why Willie Mae Horton matters. Let's see.
You ready for us to come on?
Yes,
Hey, Allison.
please.
Lene Denise. Okay.
Hello, hello, hello.
Did you want to say anything more about Source Booksellers before we take this over, Allison?
Nope.
Okay. Well, I want to
Thank
say
you
that
so much.
Source Booksellers in Detroit, in what is traditionally known as Cass Corridor, has always been just an incredible community resource, a place that hosts and facilitates conversations like these. And I'm so honored to be here with you, with my good friend, Lene Denise. You know, what would you call international local? Charcuterie board wizard.
Hello.
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 Doppelganger to Sir Bentley.
Sir Bentley.
These are all inside jokes. You know how people have dogs or animals that look like themselves? I wish that I had control of the screen because I would put a picture of Bentley side by side with you. Lene, this book is like mind-blowing. Thank you so much for writing it. I love what Saul says about this on the back. He says that Lene Denise protects and spotlights the ghost of Willie Mae Thornton through a listening practice that is praxis, process, and meditation in Black sound. And early on, like in the intro, which is just an epic intro, like, I mean, no, seriously, like this is like one of the best intros since Tony K. Bombara's Gorilla My Love.
Can you stop it, please?
I'm serious. I'm not gassing you up.
Okay. Okay, what?
Yes.
Wow.
And I love the Tony K. Bombara Gorilla My Love intro. She had this great anecdote where she's talking about kind of the perils of like including your life in your work. What you do here. She's talking about including a friend and hearing your friend's shopping cart go down the street and pass by your door, by your porch without stopping. Your friend is mad at you. Obviously, you didn't run that risk with Willie Mae Thornton, but you made real decisions around how you laid out in the beginning what your praxis was. And I want to like kick this off by pointing to that framework that you gave us. You talked about what it is to listen as a DJ. You said, and I would like you, do you have your book out?
I do. Yes.
This is not far. This is not far.
Okay. Go ahead.
Yes, I want you to please read the second paragraph. My experience of listening to Willie Mae Thornton's story is dependent on the set of ears I'm using to hear. So would you please finish that as a DJ?
Okay. And so I can't even say anything about how absolutely excited I am to be here with you. For a second, I think I want to say that because I read the most epic piece on your life today in The Atlantic. And I just want to say that, you know, you were described as being the most significant music journalist of your generation, right? And so like, I just think that's incredible because it makes
it significant. Okay, maybe he can have that. The best writer of my generation, music journalist, is Karen Good Marable. But thank you.
Okay, that's amazing. Absolutely. Yeah. In that, I don't know about best for anything. I'm saying
I know. But
you know, like
my Tony K. Bombara of my generation is Karen Good, later known as Karen.
Come on. Yes. Well, I just want to say, and then you have your glasses on. I feel very serious. I feel like I'm about to take my life seriously because you are okay. So greetings, you know, like shout out to Detroit. Everybody knows that I am a wannabe Detroit, you know, daughter. And so this is massive to me. So thank you. My experience of listening to Willie Mae Thornton's story is dependent on the set of ears I'm using to hear. As a DJ, I'm confronted by potential samples and other genres that can be mixed and blended with her styles of music. Second, I hear the difference between listening to her voice through a digital filter, CDs or MP3s, versus hearing it jump off of a piece of vinyl, a format that captures finer details of the song's qualities, including the hisses and pops between music and lyrics. Third, I hear the evolution of her discography based on her relationships with record labels. Finally, I'm listening for the different places where she can be cataloged in my collection and how she fits comfortably in categories like the one inspired by her unexpected excursion into the world of Haight-Ashbury hippies, West Coast folk blues, where Willie Mae makes sense next to Jose Feliciano, Richie Havens, Odetta, and Joan Armatradin. She, like other artists of this ilk, forced pre-existing notions of Blackness and music to take into consideration Black artist-led cross-genre fusions. So perhaps the question I'm trying to answer in this book is what it means not only to listen to the sounds Willie Mae makes, but also to hear the details of life she crafted and lived.
Yes, thank you for that. What I love about that is the first two kind of organizing principles are aesthetic, you know?
Mm.
You're talking about, and you are that rare non-Detroit DJ who I would say is excellent at blends, right? And that came through in your writing too, Lene. This is your first book, we should say that. You have not been writing for publication that long. There are things that you've said that have just been incredibly, I can visualize them. You talked, I'm going to mess up the quote, but you talked about Aretha Franklin, the history being in her throat. What did you, what's your quote about Aretha when you wrote her?
Oh, it's so funny. I can't remember, but something about,
Yeah.
yes.
Yes. Anyway, just epic lines already, even as a new writer. As a DJ, obviously, you're writing for the dance floor, and that's something that you've been doing for generations. I'm sorry, I have a plane going by. But, you know, so you talk about like how as a DJ, you imagine flow, right? So that's your first kind of, your first framework. And then you talk about like the quality of like, especially with an artist from this era, like early 20th century, like, you know, when I first started listening to like Scott Joplin records or those early blues records, I remember being so grateful that that these people were born after wax, after the possibility of recording, because we know that there were blues singers who existed for thousands of years who we can't reference because of that particular technology not being, you know? And then your third one, which is like so important, because a big part of any blues person's story, and this is again, but I'm invoking Aretha Franklin walking on stage at the White House, the Kennedy Center with her damn purse, you know what I mean? Like, is this thing about this contentious relationship with this exploitative industry, the music industry, from its very, at its nascent, as the inception of it was exploitative, particularly to Black artists. So you bringing that in was deeply important too. And then you're going to take us on some of these travels. I love how you have, you know, her in London, her in California, some of it which feels autobiographical. But talk to me more about that framework, about even your phrase, in addition to like the term that I love to use that you came up with, international local, you also coined the phrase DJ scholarship. So, and you define what that means in this book, in the intro. Can you talk more about what DJ scholarship means and why it was important to kind of lay out for your reader how you are approaching Willie Mae Thornton's story?
Well, thank you for reading closely. That's an honor for me. And I love that you understood exactly what I was attempting to do, and to break down this kind of like aesthetic, you know, or listening for the aesthetic, listening for the sort of patterns, the sociological context, listening, you know, for format or through format. So thank you. DJ scholarship. And I mean, I'm excited because the book itself represents, you know, 10 years of developing this conceptual / theoretical framework that I have used to kind of, think with sound, to think with sound, and to kind of dispel the myth that DJs are almost like kind of living jukeboxes, right? That there's no real intellectual life that's happening before we step to the dance floor, when in reality, there are 4 cultural practices that I've been thinking through critically that sort of define DJ scholarship. The first is chasing samples.
Yes.
So yeah, I'm someone who was really, really thinking with, folks like MC Light, Queen Latifah, but also paying close attention to the sounds, the storytelling through the sound. And so oftentimes, learning that my parents were listening to the music that their DJs and producers, right, were using to kind of to soundtrack these newer stories in the 80s. And so chasing samples is a real way to think about an investigative process, right? That is a part of DJ culture. The second cultural practice being digging through the crates, which is where the research is, right? You're digging through the crates as you're discovering those samples, you're making the connection, like beyond James Brown, and this our sort of ongoing reference to him as the sort of quote unquote godfather of rap, because of how often he's referenced. But I'm thinking
I would
about
say if you're on the West Coast, that might be George Clinton, but I hear you. Yeah.
absolutely, and Zap, right?
And
But I
Zap,
would
yeah,
say,
Roger Zap.
right? But I would say, let's think about, I've been digging through the crates of Aretha Franklin's Rock Steady,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
how often that had been sampled, and how often Black women have been sampled, but not really referenced. And so digging through the crates is also like digging through a kind of archive of erasure, right? Or erased histories, where we can kind of reposition, recuperate, right? Represent women, queer artists, folks who we need to find again. So that digging through the crates process is important for that work, that recuperative work. And then the third cultural practice is album cover art analysis, right? And thinking about the visual culture, the visual history of Black music. And speaking of George Clinton, thinking about those massive covers for Parliament Funkadelic, right? And I'm so sad that the name slips my mind of, oh my God, their
Is it Maggie
illustrator.
Bray? Oh, the illustrator. Okay, yeah, yeah.
Right, of just,
Yeah.
or like, let's just think about something like, if you're from, Bitches Brew, Miles
Yeah.
Davis and that album cover, Ohio Players album covers, right? Even something as simple as Sade's face on an
Yeah.
album cover, you're like that, that it becomes part of your DNA. You remember the sound based on the visual representation of the music. And then lastly is liner notes criticism, right? And so I didn't grow up just like loving reading. But when my dad would force me to read, it was a force because I was addicted to like MTV and documentaries. I'd be like, okay, then I'll just read these liner notes, okay, of the song, of the album I'm listening to daily anyway, and then learning, oh, that's where the samples are. Oh, that's who produced it. Oh, that's who's, that's the DJ, or, so that is a whole education in itself. And so that's DJ scholarship. To bring it back to Willie Mae, I literally used those 4 cultural practices to write this book. I was listening, not necessarily chasing her samples, but chasing her story. And because her history is so fragmented, which are another sort of manifestation of samples, right? These bits of fragmented histories, and like digging through the crates to find her contemporaries, and then looking at those album covers and being like, first of all, where is she on the album cover? Oh, they put her in a dress again in this album cover. Oh, she's not on that album cover, right? Or, oh, who wrote those liner notes? Oh, there's a long history of white men writing liner notes for Black music, right? So I literally use those 4 cultural practices to write this book.
That's beautiful. I want to get into how Willie Mae is presented on these album covers, and that investigative kind of thing that you did to not make an argument, but to kind of, you talked about meeting that scholar in Berlin. I'm sorry, I can't remember his name.
Michael Spork,
Michael Spork. And you talked about connecting with him in person, and that his default was that if he couldn't prove that she wasn't, that she was queer, then the default would be heterosexuality. But what you And I want to talk about that in a second, but first I want to just get back to sampling and digging in the crates for 1 second. I'm over this whole hip hop 50th, like whatever. But as you were talking, I think that we share, I don't know if you would consider it the greatest album, that we don't have to rank, but I think we both share like a deep appreciation for 3 Feet High and Rising.
Oh, yeah.
And what Prince Paul was doing and that kind of storytelling. And so I just think about, and even when I think about some of the stuff that like Q-Tip was doing, like even though I grew up in a jazz household, I don't think I knew the Heath brothers until he sampled them on, you know, Low End Theory. Ron Carter went to my high school, but it was through listening to Low End Theory that I like went and reclaimed Ron Carter, because that particular Miles Davis quintet was one that my father listened to all the time, and I had to have my own music or whatever. But you know, blues sits outside of it's early 20th century, you know, for the most part. I mean, Willie Mae Thornton is interesting because she, of course, influences, you know, one of the most famous musicians ever, Elvis, and you'll talk about that, I'm sure. But for the most part, blues sits in that early 20th century tradition. Again, back to the Scott Joplin thing about, thank God there's even recordings of her, you know? So there's this way when we think we're digging in the crates, we stop at jazz, you know? I mean, Prince Paul was, you know, Hall & Oates and all kinds, Steely Dan and all kinds of different sounds. But how familiar were you even with the blues before you took on this project?
Yeah, I like how you lightly dropped one of the most important high schools in Detroit and said that Ron Carter went there, right? And we're talking about Cass High School in Detroit, where Alice Coltrane was also, so many people, Big Sean, listen, the list goes on, Dream Hampton. So no, I just want to say that, on a very Black, on a very basic Black level, hey, I know the blues, I know B.B. King, I know Ma Rainey, like on a very basic Black level. So I think maybe to go back to the fact that when the University of Texas reached out to me, they asked me to write a book about why Prince mattered. And I was like, now I think we all know for damn sure why Prince matters. We know that because he is well documented, right? But I discovered this video of Willie Mae and I was like, I don't know who the hell this woman is, but her story has she has pulled me in a way that I don't, and yeah, what is my relationship with blues? A very limited one in terms of personal listening. I went into my B.B. King moments. I went into, just thinking about Muddy Waters because of what he was doing with electronic, the electronic guitar when he left Mississippi and went to Chicago, basic stuff. But what I had to do was a serious, I don't want to call it a crash course, but I want to say that I had to do a deep dive into blues scholarship. And of course, the go-to was the Mary Baraka's Blues People, but I wanted to think with women around it. So Angela Davis, and reading Blues Legacies and Black Feminism, reading, Hazel Carby's work on the blues. And then I discovered Clyde Wood's blues epistemology, arrested development, and think about the blues as, a kind of form of social explanation, right? And thinking about the blues as a kind of like a working class cultural production that is intentionally designed to create, craft, and present a social critique, right, of the immediate environment. And so reading Gail Jones's work on the blues and then being like, wait a minute, there's a whole 80s, fictional sort of or blues fictional archive that I need to tap into to understand how, Suge Avery emerged, to understand, little references to the blues and Toni Morrison's work. So I just studied the blues, before writing. And I was like, I don't want to go through Ken Burns. Not at all, right? Right. I want to.
Hazel Carby was a gift to those of us who weren't familiar with her work. Thank you for that citation. Angela Davis is one that a lot of us have read because Bessie is kind of the entry point for blues women, So if you know anything about blues besides Ma Rainey, who has been not documented, I wouldn't say that she's been well documented, but there film just recently about her based on a play. But Bessie Smith, and of course, I think Latifah played Bessie Smith recently.
Absolutely.
So,
Yep.
right. And so in this book, you talk about, this kind of tradition of kind of queer Black blues women, who, and you talk about, and I'd like you to talk more about this, but you said, I'd like to make space for her, meaning Willie Mae Thornton, to exist on the spectrum of sexuality without either one of us and by either of us, you're talking about Michael Spork, who had already done a book on her, lay claim to a singular sexual identity. Maybe the most radical thing Willie Mae left behind is that she did not identify as queer or butch or lesbian or gay, at least not publicly. My sense is that she didn't hate wearing dresses. She loved wearing pants. And I love that, because that's not a small thing. I mean, in a couple of decades, Katharine Hepburn is going to break the, pre-internet by, coming out in pants, right? In a film public, right?
Great reference.
Marlene Dietrich a little bit before her, but yes, this becomes like a big story, right? Like Obama in a khaki suit, right? And you talk about Willie Mae at every turn, like, doing the Katie Lang thing, the way you were describing, like how the video, which I've not seen, but you talked about her coming out on stage in this suit, basically in this pantsuit. Sounded very much to me like a Katie Lang kind of presentation, but talk to me about, and then you also write about being a Black queer woman in California, writing about this book in different places. I know that you wrote this book in many places, but talk to me about that reclamation or that queering of Willie Mae Thornton.
I love the hell out of your references. Katharine Hepburn, come on, with this kind of this radical fashion, these radical fashion choices. But so that line in particular, she didn't hate wearing dresses, she loved wearing pants. And I think the follow-up line is something like, and she carried her tools in the pockets of pants.
Her harmonica, yeah,
right?
Harmonica, yes. You said a dress offered her fewer options to store her tools. Yes, yes.
Right? So on a practical level, like the ways in which clothes are gendered and inconvenient as hell if you don't fit that kind of, those sort of, those expectations. And so she was carrying her harmonica, but she was also a drummer. And that in itself is queer when thinking about how we understand or have a visual sort of understanding of blues women, because of how often we see Ma Rainey and Bessie Smith in these gowns and these elaborate headdresses. She is out here in a 3-piece suit with her harmonica in a pocket, right? That to me felt like a kind of queering, but I was also conscious of not projecting, my maybe desire for her to be queer. And I don't have a desire for her to be queer or to when we're talking about queerness, let me just say that I don't need to know who she loved. But what I love is how she, and the way that we define queerness, queered the blues, right? Queered Texas in terms of her approach to rhythm and blues. And so writing that as, positioning myself, I say in the book, as her sort of long lost niece from LA, and she dies in LA in 1984 when I'm 9 years old. And I imagine myself at 9, like, I guess somewhere in the stars, I was chosen. She took her last breath where I took my first breath, right? So I have a responsibility here, because I don't know why I said no, not Prince, her, the person who has very limited information about her life. So essentially I will be chasing these samples like crazy, right? So yeah, I mean, I just think that there's so many different things that she did throughout her lifetime that was just like, that shifted the industry, that shifted expectations for how women were supposed to do things, like, say, for example, ask for the money that they earned at the end of a show. For her, that ask may come with a fist. It may come with a bottle across the head. That may lead her to jail. She may get out the next day and perform and be on stage talking about how Ronald Reagan is taking away food stamps from Black people in the 80s. That was like, this political work that she had been doing, and also, thinking about and thinking with blues legacies and Black feminism and what Angela Davis refers to as working class feminism, the feminism that happens in all women's prisons. And shout out to Sarah Haley, whose book I use, No Mercy Here, to think with about, you know, Black women in the 19th century in Georgia plantation prisons, you know? So the book took me in so many places. It's a real important ghost story. And I was ghost writing in a way.
Yeah. But I love a part of what you just described about feeling this, and you in the book you call it a fictive kinship with her. What I love is that this very much is in the tradition of an Alice reclaiming Zora. That's like our most kind of famous, you know, like, example of that happening. Also, what you just described, and obviously Angela, part of her triumvirate is Billie. And I don't know, did she and Billie Holiday ever cross paths?
Angela, I don't
know.
remember.
Willie
Oh,
made
you know what? I've never come across that.
Yeah, it's just a
piece of
question.
fact. No, that's important. Yeah, certainly Bessie Smith, because she
Right.
was
Yeah, of
called
course.
Little Bessie. Yeah.
I'm just thinking about Black women who go to jail.
Yep.
Like, maybe for different reasons. Like you said, she was like hitting people over the head with bottles to get her money at the end of the night. But I don't think that, I think that Billie had those same kind of struggles and scraps also.
Yep. Oh, no, that's a great point. Absolutely.
Yeah. You just talked about you invoked the 19th century and obviously the 18th century and these plantation prisons, but you also invoke and you cite Ruthie Wilson Gilmore, and obviously her abolitionist framework, but you are complicating this idea of her nickname. Willie Mae Thornton's big nickname was Big Mama. You talk about that, you know, as an honorific, you know, there's probably a Martin Lawrence movie. I don't know. It's just, in some ways it's an honorific, but you complicate it, right? You bring in Alexis Pauline Gumbs and people who have even queered the idea of what mothering is. And can you say a little bit about that? Like, because you refuse in your book to call her Big Mama. And part of that is a body politic, size and body that you talk about, but you also are talking about, you know, women who don't birth, and whose mothering may not look like this feminine nurturing thing that we put in the binary of feminine.
Yeah, I mean, and I want to be clear that she referred to herself as Big Mama often, right?
Yep.
Like, and so it is not, because I didn't anticipate.
But wait, who were you quoting? Who you quoted someone? Was it Ray Charles? Was it?
Exactly. That's exactly where I'm going.
Okay, go ahead. All right, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Thank you. No. Thank you. No. Because actually, thank you. That's perfect. I didn't anticipate people then being, you know, reading my book and being like, oh, damn, so should I stop calling her Big Mama, right? Like, is it offensive to do so? And I want to just clear the record and say no, but I do want us to think about the history of, you know, mammifying Black women, what it means to have a bigger body, and how the public responds to that. So one thing that I came across when reading reviews, you know, on her performances in the 40s and the 50s was like, or not the 40s, but the 50s, right? Because she gets the name. So a little context. Frank Schiffman, who was the manager of the Apollo, a white man, named her Big Mama after a performance, right? And the name stuck. I'm not sure of where I'm not sure of where that came from Frank Schiffman in the 1950s when he saw this tall Black woman, you know, take over the Apollo. I'm not sure about where his intentions were, but I'm like, well, that's an interesting thing. And thinking about the tradition of naming and Black folks and white folks naming Black people. So I was just like, you know, just playing with what it means to think with folks like Geneva Smitherman and language, and right, like shout out to Detroit again, and like what the word Big Mama means to us. Like, I have a Big Mama. Well, she's no longer here, right? Like, so I'm not shaming Big Mama, right? But what would it mean for us to complicate the fact that Willie Mae Thornton is a person who exists behind the character, right? And you know, and so I think that I was just spending hours at times on YouTube watching different, you know, rabbit holing for the book. And I came across a very famous Ray Charles video where he is sitting on the piano bench, Black cool in effect, glasses, swaying on beat, no music, but just that sway. And he's like, don't ask me about Elvis. I'm tired of this. Like, king of what? He's doing something that he ain't doing nothing but the Willie Mae Thornton. And he puts the in front of her name. He said he ain't doing nothing but the Willie Mae Thornton, right? And I was like, did he just crown her this kind of person that sounds like a secret, a culturally coded dance in our community? Like, hey, you're doing the Willie Mae Thornton, and then that dance is, performed at all the cookouts. Like, we know what it is.
Yes.
And then once white folks start
The
doing it, they can never do
Bismarcky,
it.
right?
Yes, the Biz Marquee, the Snake, the RoboCop. Come on, like with the Roger Rabbit, the Willie Mae Thornton.
Yep.
But he's talking about her musical legacy. I said, well, then there it is.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ray. Right.
Thank you, Ray.
The WAP. Wait a minute, somebody said the WAP. Shout out to the WAP.
Yeah. And so the is also like her as this performance, right? But there's also the is and she's this singular performer who's not mom's Mabley, who's not Betsy. She's her own thing. And before we move past this question of her presentation, because I do want to get to her as a traveling woman, I want to get to Elvis. But you talk about Hazel Carby, you kind of quote her, talking about a kind of a very, like an academic construct around feminism, the public and the private space. And these Black women being out in the public in a visual display of spangled dresses, of furs, of gold teeth, of diamonds, of all the sumptuousness and desirable aspects of their body. And then you say, while Carby's observations are accurate, I wonder how many women in the industry were erased or disappeared if they didn't embrace the widely accepted, though subversive fashion clothes of earlier blues women. Where do we place Willie Mae generationally in a description and discussion of gender, blues, and fashion? How do we understand the furless, dressless performer who was unconventionally desirable and more aligned in appearance with blues men, I mean. And then you go on to like reclaim what sexy means as a gender term, reserved for cis men and femmes. That's such important work, Lene, that you're doing there. First of all, I see you all over that work. You know what I mean?
Thank you.
We know that you're like a little fashion icon.
Ooh.
You who no one is going to deny is sexy, right? And you identify as she and her, and and you dress in this kind of in this genderless kind of fashion. Again, not trying to lean into the fictive kinship or even get into your story that much, but talk to me about this question of like, because that was such a provocative question. How many people were erased because they weren't in the gowns, because they weren't, because they just went up there and killed it in their, if we're talking about working class politics, just in their factory gear, their trousers and their work shirt. Like, why was it so important for you to like paint a full picture of what she looked like on stage and in the world?
So, part of this series is interesting because they asked us to kind of tell the story and incorporate this sort of like personal narrative. And I was like, no, I don't really want to, it almost would, I thought it would take me out of the flow of the story that I'm trying to tell with her. And then I began to remember the anxiety I felt around shopping for school clothes. I'm like, I don't know why we're going to the girl section because I need to be able to break dance. So what I need is for us, first of all, the boys have stripes and there's a more interesting, way of thinking about who I am as a 10-year-old that is listening to Run DMC, and I'm making up dances with my cousins, and we're like 5, 6, 7, 8, right? And like what I have on matters. Right. I'm going to mess up my knees. I don't want to wear knee pads and a dress, right? And so then there are these stories where Willie Mae's management team takes her shopping, takes her to these clothing stores in Texas, and they're like, what about this dress? And she's like, nah, not for me. Well, what about this? No, not so much. And so when she agrees in the store and they are taking these, I'm going to call them costumes because they were not who she was, right? Like sometimes she would show up with what the hell she came in, right? To perform. Like she was supposed to change and wear these gowns. And she would be like, I know I agreed to this, but I think the cowboy hat with the big brim and the boots make more sense. We'll talk about it after the show. You'll learn about it when you see me on stage, right? Right. And so I did a similar thing. I would go in the bathroom. I would leave the house wearing that dress. I would go in the bathroom and I would come out with my stripes and my, right? Like, and be like, what? So I think like there were bits of me in that, and I'm sure some projection, but it was important to me. Like there's this thing that I do, like there's this scene that I create where I watch her perform Hound Dog in Germany as a part of the Folk Blues Festival. And she comes in and sets her pocketbook, as my grandma would call it, like on top of the speaker or something, right? And I'm like, where did that pocketbook come from? And it wasn't the kind of, Aretha Franklin bringing my pocketbook and this is where my cash is and I carry my pocketbook. It was almost like a prop that she was given. And it felt like in the video to me that she was like, and let me put this over here that I don't have this feeling to. Again, I could be projecting, right? But I was just trying to I was listening to what I saw, right? Like, and I was like, what is that? That's interesting. The purse is is she gonna get it when she leaves? Or is it just like, let me do my real business? And so, yeah, I mean, she fought with the record company. She fought with management. She fought off rumors about her sexuality by not claiming whatever folks assumed that she was, right? And so that was important to me, is to not just be like, she was wearing men's clothes, right? Yeah. It's to think about how the clothes she chose to wear were in conversation with what she needed to, be part of how she presented musically.
Yeah.
Two different things, right?
And let's talk about Hound Dog. I mean, I'm proud of us. It's the 42-minute mark. Oh my God. And we are just now getting to Hound Dog, which is what anyone else would lead with, right?
Right. Thank you for not.
I mean, but the text of that is we're right back to feminism. You know what I mean? And this is like kind of what blues women gift a generation like Roxanne Shante, right? This is the beginning of the talk back, right? This is the, it's a little bit more than you doing me wrong. It's like, and I'm about to call you all out your name or how wrong you are behaving, towards your lover, right? So there's that, like there's the text of the song, there's what the song is, which has all of the rockabilly that is about to become rock and roll. So in as much as Little Richard gave us rock and roll, so did Willie Mae Thornton, right? My daughter attended in New York City, I hope it's still happening, the Willie Mae Rock Band camp.
Yes, right? Yes, Lafray.
And Tamar Kali, our punk rock sister and all around musician and badass, put my daughter onto that camp because even then, like this is the early 2000s, women were having to put, Willie Mae back into the conversation about the origin story of rock and roll. One of the things that you recommended to me, I think it was you recommended Baz Luhrmann's, or when I said, I think I'm going to watch this Elvis movie, you said it was good. You were like, he actually, and I agreed, like, I came away with that. I had a singular story about Elvis, and between your book and the way that you tell the story, and I want you to quickly, tell it now, not to rush you, but I don't want to, belabor the Elvis of it. Between your book and Baz Luhrmann, I don't have the Chuck D, idea of Elvis that I had since I heard those lyrics back in the 80s. So talk to me about Hound Dog and Elvis, and even what that song is saying and what it sounds like.
That's why you're one of my favorite thinkers. So thank you for how you asked that question and how you're allowing me to talk about Hound Dog, because I did go in planning a literary hit on Elvis. You about to pay for this, right? Like do you know what you did to Willie Mae? And right. And so I read his biography. I mean, first of all, he has like 100 biographies. I read a biography, and then I read the biography at least, right? I just want to say for the record that Elvis Presley today, 2023, is still and remains one of the richest dead men in the world. So the Forbes magazine does this like top 10 richest dead people, and Elvis stays within the top 3 and has for the last 3 years. Michael Jackson moves between 3rd and 4th, right? But I just want to say that Elvis remains rich, right? But he didn't write a single song. And so what I did was sat closely with a story written by Alice Walker called 1955 in the book Good Woman is Hard to Find, where she reimagines and never uses the name Willie Mae, alludes to Willie Mae and Elvis. But what she does is like introduces us to the deep pain that Elvis might have felt. She uses the name Trevor because he was singing songs that he didn't know the meaning to. Again, you think about Ray Charles and doing the Willie Mae Thornton, right? So Elvis Presley is doing the Willie Mae Thornton, getting all of these accolades and money and fame, but he doesn't know what the songs mean. But even in the story, Willie Mae is like, but I tell you one thing, he performed it well, right? Like he's making me think that he might be outperforming me. Then she's like, no, but that's not possible. But still, right?
Was there evidence that she liked Elvis's performance?
No, there's evidence that she was like, he was dirty to me. He refused to speak to me. We tried to set a situation up where we would perform Hound Dog, and his management, it was actually his management, right? Was like, no, right? So I ended up learning that I accidentally like Elvis, right? Like that I ended up learning about the fact that he had undeniable talent, that he grew up, in East Trigg Church in Mississippi, that he was sitting in the back of the pew, that the preachers knew him, that he was like that, like that he had, he had this interesting relationship with folks like Cissy Houston, who was one of his background singers, Whitney's mama from the Sweet Inspirations, that like he bought his quote unquote maid and his cook homes and cars, and right, like that there were these interesting kind of, I feel like pivots away from the dominant narrative that forced me to humanize him. And so it is interesting that Elvis becomes a victim of the music industry, right? That he is also forced to perform and to kind of, just to kind of that labor. He was a sort of a work mule, right? And he turns to drugs. He's in pain. He's trying to stay up. He's drinking alcohol, but he's also addicted to soul food, which feels like an interesting sci-fi kind of Black revenge story. Like you got killed by chitlins, Elvis? Elvis,
shut up. Wait, hold up, because I want folks to walk away with some clarity around this. Did Elvis ever pay Willie Mae Thornton for Hound Dog?
No, Elvis. So, but I think it's important to think about the fact that the original contract happened with a Black man in Texas named Don Roby, that Willie Mae Thornton signed a contract saying that she would get a one-time payment of $500, right? Mm-hmm. And so that was the beginning of the, right, like the end or the beginning of the dominant narrative. But it is not just about Elvis. It's in fact this Black man who's similar to Berry Gordy, right? Who had like ownership over the publishing and of so much in Motown and all of this stuff, and all the artists that tried to sue him and all of those things, that I had to reckon with Black, music moguls. And interestingly enough, what Puffy did recently, right?
I know, I was gonna bring that up, but I'm like, I don't want to be on here like trying to wave some flag for Puff, but I couldn't believe when I saw that.
I think that's interesting.
I know, like that. So recently, don't know, Puff gave back music publishing to the artists who helped make Bad Boy. Barbara Bearfield is in here and is saying, I know Barbara's saying that I think her that she photographed Big Mama in 1980 at the Newport Jazz Festival. And she performed with Jay McShann. She was so powerful and down to earth, friendly, and dressed in a gray pinstripe suit and big straw hat.
Oh my God.
Yes.
That's amazing. Wait, can I have the Source bookstore? Can I buy a book for Barbara Bearfield? Because I just want to say that I have a whole chapter about her performance at the Newport Jazz Festival. One of the most fascinating things about that chapter and that experience is that I couldn't find the visuals for it. So the fact that someone
Barbara's giving you, maybe you can get that photograph, and she's also, of course, the Black feminist praxis that is our citation. She's saying that Rosetta Writes, who was a songwriter, record producer, produced the series.
Yep.
And her archives can be found at Duke University. So I don't know
Yep.
if Barbara's photographed too.
That's beautiful. I write about Rosetta as well. Yep. Oh,
Yep.
you, Barbara. Listen.
You better snatch that contact.
Listen. Absolutely.
313, of course, is the Detroit homie.
313. Oh my God. Please. Oh yeah, Rosetta was amazing. Sorry, go ahead.
No. All right, Nanita had a question. This is my friend Nanita. Would love to know if anything surprised Lene while you were researching. And then I'll stack that question with Florence's, who says, can you share anything you discovered about Willie Mae and Sister Rosetta Tharpe relating to each other? Did their paths cross? And if so, any insight on that? So anything surprised you while you were researching? I'm sure 1,000 things did, but anything?
I'm like, man, okay, now I'm digging through my own crates. But okay, so for some reason, I don't know why, but Mahalia Jackson. So I have a chapter on something that happens between 1971 and 1972, like Mahalia Jackson dies. Willie Mae produces her first gospel album, which she had been wanting to do her whole life, although she was like very clear that she had a complicated relationship with Christianity. And then also Aretha Franklin's Amazing Grace comes out in 1972, but then also Aretha Franklin sings at Mahalia Jackson's funeral, right? So like there were all these interesting connections that happened in 1972 or between 71 and 72 as it relates to Black gospel. But what was interesting to me about that is that, you know, like this gospel album that Willie Mae created called Saved was this like really like unexpected Black psychedelic rock sound, right? Where she is like singing, you know, yes, Jesus loves me, or he's got the whole world in my hand. And then it's like giving you Hendrix in the back. I was like, what is happening? We're like, what is like, we are stuck on Hound Dog Child. Like this catalog is massive. Her range is massive for her. She's like, yeah. And so, you know, like, okay. And then let me say that
you talk about her as a self-taught artist, the same as Jim also.
Absolutely. No, absolutely.
It's musician, I should say self-taught musician, multi-instrumentalist.
Totally. Multi-instrumentalist, self-taught musicians who oftentimes grow up in the Black church and like not knowing how to read and compose music, right? And Jimi Hendrix is part of that. But okay, I'll skip for the nature of time, for just like to respect time.
What about the Rosetta Tharpe connection?
Yeah. So the Rosetta Tharpe, I never came across anything that said that the two met, and then the biographer never referenced them meeting. But obviously they were contemporaries. I think I would say a primary difference is that at one point Rosetta Tharpe was like, you know, openly, at least in you know, openly queer. But I think maybe, I mean, and was dating or with and partnered with one of her backup singers, I don't even use that. But, you know, but then learning that Sister Rosetta Tharpe is partly responsible for introducing Little Richard, right, to, you know, a music community, and that Little Richard is basically studying folks like Rosetta Tharpe and Mahalia Jackson to craft his approach to what he calls, you know, the architecture and being one of the architects of rock and roll. So he is citing Mahalia Jackson and Rosetta Tharpe as being part of the blueprint of rock and roll. And so, yeah, I think that was an interesting fact, is to throw Mahalia Jackson into the category of rock, which I fully agree, right? Because the Black church was like, you are shaking your head too much. You're shaking your hair too much. You're moving too much under the robe.
There are questions I would have asked you about, like you have this great, one of the things that you said in the beginning in terms of your framework was also looking at relationship to the industry. So you introduced me to Baytown recordings. You introduced me to a Black-owned label called Irma Records, founded by musician and producer Bob Geddins, a Black Texan who migrated to California. So all of that is in this amazing book. Like you're going to learn about a kind of pre-record industry. Again, you know, like wax and like recording music is still, you know, not a new thing, but it's not an old thing. It's not an ancient thing when she's working. So the music industry is a nascent thing. And so much of like you documenting her struggles in that context is like, is so fascinating to read. But the final way that I see you being your friend and knowing how you move through the world, and also knowing how much you love James Baldwin, was, and I didn't think you were projecting, you were finding these points of connection of her traveling through the world, you know? And that's not a small thing either. You know, you talk about her in Europe, you talk about her in California, you talk about her in all these places that are so far from the small place where, you know, she didn't even finish her primary education. I mean, I think you have her dropping out of school at 4th or 5th grade, right? So, and obviously with James Baldwin, with Josephine Baker, we have this story of like the Black artists going to Europe and getting a kind of acceptance that they won't get here. But even that you complicate. Can you talk a little bit about her in the 4 minutes that we have left as a traveling blues woman?
Yeah, and that is,
yeah.
No, totally. Thank you for how you set that up, because I do start the chapter on, first of all, so she records her first album in London, right? She's from Alabama. So one of the things that, you know, Carby and David,
Mississippi,
Oh, I didn't even hear you say that. But I mean, of course, yeah, she spends at real time in Mississippi. But yeah, I think that like one of the ways that Hazel Carby and Angela Davis complicate the blues is by thinking about who gets to move, who gets to travel. You know, why do we have this kind of picture of the lone blues man moving from train to train? What are we thinking about the women who stayed behind and had to, like, you know, watch the children, raise the home, be in this domestic role? And the nerve of Willie Mae to be on tour with a vaudeville group, right? To then leave that group in Atlanta because they didn't pay her, and then go to Texas and start performing there. And then, you know, after falling out with her record label, decide to go to LA, where she's like, you know, crafting a new sound as part of the central jazz community in LA. And then she goes to New York and she's like, yeah, I'm not really into jazz. There's a whole bunch of like instruments and you guys don't ever stop. She had a crazy sense of humor that I loved. But I just say this.
She said you guys don't ever stop. She was talking about improvisation. That's hilarious.
Thank you for picking that. Yes. And she was like, I don't know which, right? So she would perform at these jazz festivals and be over here like shady, like, but is that's what you right? And then
remind me to tell you my godmother falling asleep at a Coltrane concert at the Village Vanguard.
It's that though. It's the importance of knowing the Black folks are like, no, that's boring to me, right? That's interesting.
Going on
right?
solo, it's a 20-minute solo. Hello,
right?
Mike.
This is what she said. Meanwhile, Duke Ellington, Miles Davis, Herbie Hancock, they were like, who is Willie Mae? Who is Willie Mae? Like, we want to perform with her, right? So yeah, music migration, music in place, Black music geographies, right? And music mapping, and what happens when you connect the dots and you create these stories based on how, you know, how music, sound, ideas, people, culture, food, you know, and fashion travels with Black folks who are moving from place to place to try to keep a roof over their head and creating genres of music in the process.
Yes. All right now. So Rudy Roo is like, why do we have a curfew? Let's get all our dreams 50-11 questions.
Listen.
I want to say that Lene Denise is on tour. I also, as a I had a dinner party last night and I was on Spotify looking for your playlist and I couldn't find them. So DJ Lene Denise, she doesn't usually go by DJ Lene Denise anymore, but Lene Denise is a DJ who makes incredible music, and I can't find are they on SoundCloud? Like, where can we find?
They should be. But
I used to be able to find you on Spotify. Go ahead.
I know, and you've been playing my mixes since 1972, which I really appreciate. You've been talk about music and plays. You've played my mixes in LA, in Detroit, and in Martha's Vineyard. So, but and that music is typically South African. So that's again. So come on. Yep. But no, I don't know where I have a pod. What do I have? SoundCloud. But can I just state for the record that my DJ name is not scholarship? Lately, I've been noticing people
Oh,
have
no,
been
that's
like,
just your Twitter hand. But your DJ
Right.
scholarship is a phrase that you coined.
framework, right?
National
But I am not, I don't want y'all to introduce me at a party and be like, we got DJ scholarship and don't do that,
That
y'all.
would be so funny. And I would expect you to come out rapping like K
Right,
Solo.
right.
Um,
Right.
but
When I SPELL, okay. Anyway, you said K Solo. I can't believe
and
that.
you just immediately start freaking spell rapping. Okay, I saw a lot of
Spell
friends.
rapping. I'm sorry, spell rapping is
I
ridiculous.
saw a lot of friends in the
Sorry.
chat. Nicole Moore, a bunch of people that we know.
Dr. Matthew Morrison and Black Sound. Hello.
There you
Yes.
go. Of course,
Hello.
I'm missing Greg Tate, and I always want to invoke him because Greg Tate, and I thank you so much for the acknowledgments that you wrote. Because you start out by saying Greg. You're like, Greg Tate introduced us, and then then you go on to tell this other story. And
What I
again,
said was that, like Greg Tate, Dream Hampton is a pattern master. And Alyssa Blunt Moorhead refers to Greg Tate as a pattern master.
Yes.
And I was like, and that's actually what Dream is as well, that Greg and Dream are and were peers, right? And so.
but you know, I'm just bringing him up because he would have loved this book, and he would have loved to see that your riffs and your freestyles and your deep knowledge and your flow have all made it onto the page. So everyone, University of Texas Press, when is this out? Why Willie Mae Thornton Matter?
It's a Virgo, September 12th.
I love us Virgos. That's another
Virgo.
That's another live stream. Thank you, Allison and Source Booksellers.
Thank
Rudy
you both
Rule,
so
Rudy Rule,
much.
Lafray's in the house. Rudy Rule's in the house.
Here talking about
Yes.
drummers. Oh,
Yes.
okay.
Zai, listen. Okay. Nicole Moore. Okay, listen. Sorry, I'm done.
I
I'm
want
done.
to thank everybody that hung in with us, and this conversation was beyond amazing. And we can't wait to read the book, and for to celebrate it even more on the release. We're going to have to find some music to put with it, so we get some extra attention to it. So it'll be available at sourcebooksellers.online.com, in our store, maybe forever, and at any indie if they're closer to you.
Oh my God. I do want to give the book to Barbara, but were we able to, I only got her number, but not
she put
the
her
email
email in there too. Did you
put
get
it
it,
in every-
Allison? I'll grab it. I'm grabbing it now. I'm grabbing it.
Okay.
And I'm gonna text it.
And so I'm gonna buy the book online, and I guess I could just send anyway. Yeah, we'll figure it out. But I definitely want Barbara to have a book.
Okay. All right.
And she wants to show you the pictures.
Oh, that's amazing. That's
Yeah.
ridiculous. So please, yes, I'll get her email. Thank you.
Okay, I got it.
Shout
I got
out
the
Detroit. Thank
Hey.
you all. Thank you all. Thank you all. Thank you all.
All right. Good night,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Get some rest,
All
Renee,
right.
out in Amsterdam.
some
I know it's
rest.
good night. Okay, bye, y'all.
Woo.